Hey, Patrick.
Hey, Michael J. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Happy Thanksgiving, by the way.
Happy Thanksgiving to you.
So this week, I am thankful for. Did you see this deck from Adrian Sullivan?
Without question, this was. I mean, it's not. It's not every day you see such a dope win, and from one of the game's all time like greatest theorists, one of the godfathers of Magic strategy. Adrian Sullivan showing up with a really, and he's not a stranger to eclectic card choices for his decks. But the technology in this one is not only high level and awesome, it seems so good, and I think you can use this in other strategy. Like, there's some really amazing stuff here. This is a huge leap forward in the format, I think.
Yeah, so Adrian Sullivan, just a quick rundown, has been playing, I think, like as long as we have, with us, actually, I think in some cases for 20-odd years. He used to be my roommate here in New York, and I stole the Philosophy of Fire from him. That's a little-known thing.
Yeah, he's one of the originals, and wow. Yeah, sorry, keep going. I'm just so happy to see it, and in his native state of Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is like a hometown win, akin to when Bob Maher Jr. caught Courtney into the sky, hoisting the trophy in Chicago 2000. But, yeah, I mean, I think BDM said it best. Like, when Adrian spell swindled a Carnage Tyrant for treasure value, I mean, like, that's just the most Adrian thing you can think of doing, right?
Well, and it's so awesome. So let's talk about that for a second. So for those not familiar, Adrian Sullivan played a very exotic take on Jeskai control. And one of the most defining characteristics of Adrian's deck was the use of 4 Niv-Mizzet Parun and 2 Dive Down, with Dive Down being a way to help, instead of just like traditional counter magic, using Dive Down as a way to protect Niv-Mizzet. Because not only do you get to draw a card off the Dive Down or whatever, but you get to the ability to, if you can just stick a Niv-Mizzet and untap, you are just dominating by so much. And then instead of Chemist's Insight or Azur's Gateway or any traditional options like that, Adrian used 4 copies of Treasure Map, giving him the right amount of draw smoothing early, as well as a less ambitious endgame than Azur's Gateway. Part of it was Chemist's Insight was just too slow for just how fast the format has become. And Azur's Gateway was too high investment to get the big payoff. You need the extra cards sooner. And you need extra cards. I mean, Azur's Gateway was all about the mana advantage, but Adrian just wanted a few. He wants to try to keep up with these Golgari decks.
So one of the things about Treasure Map versus Azur's Gateway that I found, I've played a lot of both cards in the standard format, is Azur's Gateway is really awesome when you flip it over, especially if you've got a Banefire in your hand, right? It's fantastic, right? But the thing about it is you got to go to the well 5 times, and even when you do...
When it goes well. Yeah, the well has to be going well.
Sometimes it just doesn't flip, Treasure Map, you go to the well 3 times, you got a Black Lotus, and maybe you got an Ancestral Recall. It's there for you every single time. 3 versus 5 versus 3 versus more than 5 sometimes.
Well, and if you look at how Treasure Map curves in Adrian's deck, it's actually a very effective turn. Like, if you play Treasure Map on turn 2 or turn 3, you get to flip it on turn 5, and the turn that you flip it, you actually have exactly 7 mana. You had 4 mana left over from your lands, and then you get that Black Lotus of treasure mana, leaving you with 7, so you can drop Niv-Mizzet with a treasure open in case you need to dive down. Like, that's so sick.
Yeah, so I think that, obviously Dive Down is even more than the presence of Niv-Mizzet Parun in Adrian's deck is like an exotic choice. But I think it's worth...
And this is a deck with 7 creatures.
It's worth pointing out he's got a Spell Pierce also. Like, Spell Pierce does some dive downing, Like,
yep.
Especially like...
Well, if it's turn 5 and you play Niv-Mizzet on turn 5, your opponent could easily have a Vraska's Contempt or a Vivian Reed.
Oh, can you imagine piercing Vivian Reed with the treasure? Ugh.
Oh, yeah.
That's just beautiful.
Absolutely. And so this loops back down to the Spell Swindle, because not only does Treasure Map give you a way to convert all those Spell Swindle treasures into a game-winning card draw engine, the 4 treasure maps and the Spell Swindle are actually an important part of the mana base. You see, while Adrian's deck has no planes and very little white in the main, all things considered, like, has that one Settle the Wreckage for, ambitious costs, but he's actually relatively constrained when it comes to the white mana. The matchups, however, where he boards in Spell Swindle are the matchups where you have Lyra Dawnbringer, Cleansing Nova, and a Settle the Wreckage. And so, like, when he's playing against Golgari and he wants to bring in these double white cards, having access to Spell Swindle and Treasure Map for ways to give him white mana means this is actually between 4 ops and 4 treasure maps. This is a Jeskai deck that actually can cast double white cards with 0 problem, despite no planes and no tap lands beyond the good ones.
Yeah, I think that Adrian's mana base is really worth dwelling on for a second. First of all, he only played 25 lands. Many of the Jeskai play more than 25 lands. But this is really, really elegant in my opinion. He's got Clifftop Retreat taps for red, Glacial Fortress taps for blue, Island obviously taps for blue, Sacred Foundry taps for red, Steam Vents taps for red or blue, Sulphur Falls taps for red or blue. Every single land in Adrian's deck taps for Niv-Mizzet Parun.
Yeah, and when you're playing 4 Niv-Mizzets, that's got to be step 1 of your mana base,
Yeah, so the thing is, like, Niv-Mizzet Parun is just this amazing Magic of the Gathering card, right? Like, 6 mana for a 5/5, flying stack of abilities, right? So dominating. If you untap with this thing in play, it's unbelievable, and it's unbelievably synergistic with the other cards in Adrian's deck, right? But the trade-off on this card is it's hard to cast, right? Like, blue, 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 red, 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 ain't no joke, right? Like, you just can't cast it sometimes unless you bend your mana base the way that he has.
Yep, and the ability for Treasure Map to give him even more opportunity to support this bent of a mana base. Treasure Map obviously is part of the reason why that's like a huge part of the reason why he can get away with 25 land. Like, Wafo and I played 26 land with 4 ops. Adrian's playing 25 land with 4 ops, but those 4 treasure maps, as well as just not needing Chemister's Insight to fix your mana. He's lower to the ground. He's got a Shock. He's got a Spell Pierce. He's got 2 Lava Coils. There's lots of little things. It sounds silly, but even just like, for instance, 2 Enigma Drakes instead of Crackling Drake. That's a wild choice, right?
Yeah, 2 Enigma Drakes and a Rekindling Phoenix. Let's talk about this for a second. This is unusual. Not that Rekindling Phoenix isn't a completely plausible card in Jeskai. I have seen a Rekindling Phoenix hold off Lyra Dawnbringer all day in Jeskai, and I thought it looked awesome, right? Like, force the opponent to, like, really commit right into a Settle or a Cleansing Nova that the Rekindling Phoenix was going to survive,
Yeah.
But so it's totally plausible, but it's weird to see 2 Enigma Drakes and a Rekindling Phoenix, 0 Crackling Drakes. Based on our conversation last week, you were really big into you got to have Crackling Drake just to kill somebody.
Yeah, well, Enigma Drake kills people just as well as Crackling Drake does.
A little bit worse.
Almost the same. Well, a little bit better because it's also cheaper. It comes down sooner.
Yeah, there's no Chemister's Insight in Adrian's build, so I think it matters a little bit less. That's one of the main areas where Crackling Drake's a little bit better than Enigma Drake, but you're right, it's just cheaper here.
Right, and I personally, I want to believe, I want to try. It's still a little surprising to me for Enigma Drake. There's some interesting things. I could believe it, but Crackling Drake is just a more powerful card in general, but I think it might actually be sweet here. The fact that Enigma Drake can give me some examples of why Enigma Drake lines up so well right now temporarily. When I was at the Pro Tour and played Crackling Drake and my opponent played Vivian Reed, I lost the game. Took several turns, but I just started falling further and further behind. If I'd been able to play Enigma Drake on turn 3 instead of Crackling Drake on turn 4, I would have had mana open before he could ever threaten to Crackling Drake. The extra card didn't end up mattering. Like, I had plenty of cards. I could beat him in card advantage going long.
Oh, yeah.
And
you could just, like, dive down Vivian Reed's ability or like, counter it and then just – or, you know, if it lived for whatever reason, you could just smash it with the Enigma Drake, right? Like,
right.
Probably enough power there just to kill even a 6 loyalty Vivian Reed.
Absolutely. And then Crackling Drake requiring you to tap out on turn 4 in this world of just an increased number of all sorts of planeswalkers. It's possible that Enigma Drake coming down a turn earlier is worth it. I would have to try it, but I could believe it. I have to see it first, though. But Rekindling Phoenix I actually kind of like a fair bit, because even though Lava Coils are all over the place, I think that the Rekindling Phoenix giving you that extra card advantage in the form of board presence, and that's one of the themes of Adrian's deck, is that there's an increased focus on board presence, not just abstract counter magic and card draw. No Chemist's Insights and only 5 counterspells, including 0 Sinister Sabotage. Instead, go ahead.
Yeah, so we've talked about this before. Like, if you just think about this from a kind of an archetype standpoint, we're calling this deck Jeskai Control, and it certainly has... This
is Jeskai midrange.
Yeah, it has cards similar to Jeskai Control, but if you were going to line this up, let's call it like next level deck building style, the Jeskai Control decks that we've typically seen they're descendants of Weissman, right? They're like Fortress. They have like these kind of elements. This is almost a non-blue control deck that has some counterspells.
See, it has some elements of that, but I think it's even more a tap out deck. Instead of Moloku, he's got Teferi. Instead of Kaiga, he's got Niv-Mizzet.
Yeah.
And nothing you're doing is as good as Teferi or Niv-Mizzet.
Oh, hell no.
And then instead, all he's doing is using this other stuff to try to bridge to Teferi and Niv-Mizzet. It's the same thing. This is like Jushi Blue, but instead of so much counter magic, it's just got a lot more sorcery speed removal and just answers. You know, like Deafening Clarion, sorcery speed, Lava Coil, sorcery speed, and then Treasure Map, sorcery speed, Enigma Drake. He's got a lot more.
Treasure Map itself is the Jushi Apprentice, right?
Exactly. So this is Jushi Blue 2018.
Right. This is Jushi Blue. The thing is, like, Enigma Drake, I was actually looking at this. It's like Enigma Drake is like, it's like a Faith Spetters. It's just like gain 4 life or something. You go like first turn Optershock, second turn like Lava Coil or like Syncopate your guy, and then you just like play Enigma Drake. Can they get through it? Maybe, maybe not. But even if they get through it, you just gained 4 life. Right? Like, it's fine. And it traded maybe for 2 cards.
Yep.
So, like, nobody kills a 4, right? Like, unless they...
Well, I don't know. Lava Coils are a lot of places, but that can cost them a key turn. If you're playing Enigma Drake on 3, if they spend their 3 killing your Enigma Drake, it could have been a lot worse for you.
Oh, yeah. If they're using their like, Lava Coil, I mean, how many Lava Coils did they draw? If you, like, play the Phoenix the next turn or something, they're in trouble because the Lava Coil is at a premium against cards like Rekindling Phoenix.
One of the things that is easy to gloss over because of in Adrian's list is the amount that Adrian's deck has a lower converted mana cost than, like, any other Jeskai deck in the room. So he's relying so heavily on 4 Niv-Mizzet, 3 Teferi, and 3 Expansion Explosion for his card advantage. Like, the fact that he's got Expansion Explosions, which can be used early, like, this is like with so many cheap spells like Shock and Lava Coil, Adrian can book the expansion part to real use. But he's going the route of, I'm going to play with tons of really cheap interaction, and I'm going to get my card advantage from a big haymaker. And he doesn't want the nuts. He doesn't want the little nickel and dime of Crackling Drake and Chemist's Insight or Divination or any of that stuff. He's just trying to go over the top with one big haymaker, but emphasize the deck being as fast as possible to be able to keep up with these white aggro decks.
So I think that the Juicy Blue comparison that you made a little bit earlier makes a lot of sense there. Like if you think about Niv-Mizzet Parun and the context of that card in this deck, especially if you're accelerating it out with Treasure Map, but even when you're not, that card really puts you in a different place archetype-wise, because basically when you untap with it and play, you're playing a different game than everybody else, right? Like, first of all, this is clocking them in 3 or faster turns, because Niv-Mizzet just does extra damage, right? Like, in addition to being a pretty solid creature in terms of its size and abilities relative to its casting cost, it just does extra. And when you're combining it with Expansion Explosion or anything else, right, there's just a stack of cards that Niv-Mizzet can piggyback off of. Like, it's like almost like you're playing against like Mistbind Click, right? They're just going to kill you.
Yeah, it puts you under a really short clock, and its ability to just spray, shooting pings all over the place, because it's not just upstairs, it's also obviously to all the random 2/1s these white decks are making.
Oh, sure.
So this, and that's actually not even the end of it either. Like obviously having access to 3 Deafening Clarion, 2 Lava Coil, a Shock, Settle the Wreckage, there's a lot of cheap interaction, but I think his restraint and downplaying of the counter magic, including in the sideboard, there's only 1 negate in a sideboard. He's got a Spell Swindle and a Disdainful Stroke, but no, like, the fact that he's just so
like
playing a different game.
4 Ionize, right? Like it's
Instead, he's got more of that tap-out experience with those 2 Ixalan's Bindings, 2 Lyra Dawnbringers, 2 Star of Extinction, a Cleansing Nova, 2 Banefires, which I know you love. But, like, the fact that he's hitting from different angles than people are expecting, he's got a lot of options, and he's just owning it. He's just playing a tap-out blue deck instead of trying to play the deck or a draw-go.
I just want to shout out the Clarion in Adrian's deck. How this is spectacular! You just give your guy lifelink, and you're just getting a bonus. Like it's already killing their team, and you're just getting an extra bonus, and you're getting lifelink, and it's meaningful in this deck because you've got all guys that, well, maybe not the Rekindling Phoenix on the front end, but almost all your guys survive it. And if it's Niv-Mizzet, oh my gosh. It's like the synergy there is way better than in most other Jeskai control decks. That card, which is awesome in this metagame already. Yep.
And it's interesting, too, that Deafening Clarion has a different meaning when you're not playing with any Sinister Sabotages and you have only 2 Ionize. So he's just, more frequently, there's just no tension at the 3. And more frequently, there's no tension at the 4 because he's got because often what he's going to want to do is play a 2 or a 3 off curve so that he can activate his Treasure Map. Lyra Dawnbringer is an exciting one too because when you're playing so much less permission and you're playing against these red decks that have so much burn and they board into this experimental frenzy sort of burn deck, Adrian's deck can actually counteract them in a kind of a really interesting way. First of all, obviously, Lyra Dawnbringer is fantastic against those people.
Yeah, we hate that. We hate that.
It's absolutely fantastic. But also, second of all, having 2 Lyra Dawnbringers helps make up for having that extra life gain thing. It helps make up for his lack of life gain in the main deck, the outside of the Deafening Clarions. Like a lot of people were playing with Cantrip gain 3, and with Lyra Dawnbringer in the sideboard, there's a little bit less pressure on Adrian to be playing those. And then the Ixalan's Binding being a 4-cost tap-out card. Normally, we wanted to play Ixalan's Binding so bad, but part of the problem is that if you're just full on stuff like Chemist's Insights, it's hard, and Crackling Drakes, it's just how many 4s can you play? Well, Adrian's got 1 Settle the Wreckage, 1 Rekindling Phoenix, done. He's got all the room in the world for 4s.
So from the,
and which gives him an answer to the experimental frenzy,
So as an experienced Jeskai player, looking at Adrian's deck, does this deck have a distinct edge against other Jeskai decks because of 4 Niv-Mizzet Parun, or how's this looking?
So Niv-Mizzet Parun is absolutely game-breaking against other Jeskai decks. This is a deck that has it's one of those deals where it's like the Cavaliers in years gone by, where the depth of your roster isn't necessarily going to line up to the depth of other teams' rosters, but you're really good at the top. And Niv-Mizzet here, really, really good at the top. This is a deck with 3 expansion explosions and 4 Niv-Mizzets, which are all really fantastic cards for the mirror. And so even though Adrian's deck has a lot worse, most of the cards in Adrian's deck line up equal or slightly worse, the hope is that his tippity top is so unreal good that that carries the day.
I mean, I have a huge bias for treasure map in control mirrors anyway. I was sideboarding that in blue-white approach as soon as the card was printed. I thought it was better than Search for Iskanta or some of the other options, or even some of the instant speed card drawing, any of the forecasting cost ones, just because it came down fast, and then it helped you get your land drops, which is really what you want in the early game, and then it was just Black Lotus Ancestral Recall later, and then you just had extra. You just kept the extra land also. Right, people forget about that. Just I actually also have another land, which is fantastic.
Particularly when you have or if you just have 3 expansion explosions.
Oh, sure.
Where every extra mana late can be a huge, high impact thing.
Oh yeah, it's literally just draw an extra card to have that extra land.
And then the fact that he's got 2 Banefires in the sideboard, which are subtly important and powerful in Adrian's deck for these control matchups, and fitting into that same. Most of your cards you're going to lose more battles than you're going to win, but the hope is that you're going to win the battle that matters. And so even though Adrian's got so few counterspells compared to the control decks, he's got 4 Niv-Mizzets that are uncounterable. He's got Treasure Map, which can often come down before counter magic could stop it. He's got 2 Banefires in the sideboard that play into the uncounterable and play into the Treasure Map plan. Treasure Map helps find them, gives you extra mana for making a big Banefire that'll win the game. It's not inconceivable for Adrian to drop Niv-Mizzet, get a little bit of value, lose the fight over Niv-Mizzet, but take that extra card advantage, parlay it into another Niv-Mizzet, get a little bit of extra card advantage, lose that battle, and have an opponent at 13 where Adrian can Banefire him out. So I don't know. This deck is vintage Adrian Sullivan at his finest, and I think this deck is a masterpiece.
So other thing just to note, I think in any control mirror, maybe not Esper, but I think the Jeskai is much more common, is that I think he has enough tools that, especially in a sideboarded game, he could just kill everything that the opponent tries to kill him with, right? He can plausibly Ixalan's binding your Niv-Mizzet, right? Which doesn't even trigger Niv-Mizzet.
Right.
He can disdain...
Or your Teferi.
Yeah, he could disdainful stroke your Teferi, right? And he has these cheap counter spells, that, the 1 Spell Pierce, or, some of these 2 Casting Us counter spells, the 1 Negate. You just
and the 1 to stroke, yep.
Yeah, just all right, I'm going to do my thing. Maybe I win, maybe I don't. You come back, you try to get your threat down, and just counter it. And you can just run them out. I mean, he certainly has enough, just random creature removal, even if it's Starve Extinction, to deal with somebody's Lyra Dawnbringer. It's fine. I think he just has enough.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think that it's he's got enough there and of the right types, but it's I don't think it's sort of like fairies in that he's not as worried about controlling everything. He just wants to keep you off balance so that he can start to snowball an advantage. And I think if he's playing against the other control decks, if he were to sit around forever, they would eventually beat him. They've got more cards that draw cards. They've got more counter spells. But Adrian's got Niv-Mizzet times 4. He's got high tempo plays that can try to create a temporary imbalance, a temporary mana advantage. And he's got things like Banefire and Ixalan's Binding that can really disproportionately unbalance the opponent and put them in just such an awkward spot.
I completely.
Oh, one more thing, by the way, and this is something you've been singing this song from day one. Adrian's 2 ionizes actually matter. The damage from them actually matters because some of Adrian needs the ionize against the control decks, and that extra 2 damage is an important part of the whole little Niv-Mizzet value. Get a little extra damage from Niv-Mizzet, get a little extra damage from Niv-Mizzet, and then Banefire him out. Adrian's deck is gonna lose more than 50% of the short-term battles. He's just trying to eke out some points here and there, draw enough cards to find a Banefire and win. Or, happen to get lucky with stick a Niv-Mizzet with enough mana advantage that he can just ride that to victory.
Sure. I think it goes, especially right now, because this top 8 is showing, a steep change back to where we were a few weeks ago in terms of what the metagame's looking like. This deck, this version that Adrian's playing, is also just Hellfire and Brimstone for Golgari, right? Like, Golgari is terrified literally of the cards Expansion, Explosion, and Star of Extinction. And those are the cards that he's playing, and the fact that he can protect his Niv-Mizzet Parun so many different ways from their Vivian Reed or...
That's the thing. I think that it can be easy to lose track of just... Like, Niv-Mizzet straight up seems bad against Golgari, but when you have 2 dive downs and a Spell Pierce, it's such a different experience. And I don't know. I don't know that this deck blows Golgari out of the water, but I think Golgari in particular was hurt by not knowing the contents of Adrian's deck.
Fair.
Because, if you just sit around... It's not, Adrian's got 1 Settle the Wreckage main deck. It's not like he can handle all these Carnage Tyrants that well.
Yeah, but he could LSV you, Like, if you flash them the Settle the Wreckage, maybe they're terrified of it, right? They're just, people are trying to do the nickel and dime instead of the Alpha Strike.
Also, he's got some really sneaky added options, like... When you have 1 Cleansing Nova, 2 Star of Extinction, and 1 Settle the Wreckage, and a 2nd Settle the Wreckage in the board, he's got a fair number of answers after boarding. But stuff like that Spell Swindle for value play you described is actually a very real thing. If your opponent plays a Carnage Tyrant and you Spell Swindle it, even though you don't actually successfully counter it, when you untap, you've got 12 mana. What if you just Banefire their face for 11? Or what if you just Niv-Mizzet and have 7 mana open?
So the possibilities are endless when you have, what is that? Black Lotus times 2?
A blacker. Come on. So I don't know. This is a really cool deck, and I'm super excited to see Adrian coming out on top with the deck of the weekend.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. You know what is even more exciting for me about this deck is that, like you said before, there's just new stuff here, or at least new looks at old stuff. Maybe this isn't the final fold version of, call it the Sullivan blue deck for this format, the Corruptor blue deck or whatever you want to call it. But he opened the door, right? And it's just going to be wild times for Dive Down and Spell Swindle, and maybe a completely new, cool, different archetype is going to be born out of this.
Right, and that actually is a great point. I think Dive Down plus Niv-Mizzet should be used in a lot more places. I think that's a game changer. And I think Dive Down's an underrated card in the first place. But Spell Swindle, I think, is a better surprise card. I don't think Spell Swindle is going to age well. But it's possible, and I do think that it's really important to note that Spell Swindle really helps get Star of Extinction down on time. Because sometimes you can just be too far behind to wait until turn 7 to star. But if you can spell swindle and actually star on turn 6 instead, it's not the biggest thing in the world, but that little bit can matter.
Yeah, but you have so many more resources than they do when that resolves that way. Like I feel like if you haven't played a lot of Star of Extinction, people don't realize that like the Stone Rain aspect of it is actually relevant also.
Right. Oh yeah. And then Star of Extinction costing 7 is also really cool with Treasure Map. Because if you Treasure Map on turn 2 or 3 and then just start mapping, it flips on turn 5, and as we mentioned earlier, you end up with 7 mana. So you can actually star on turn 5. And if you're on the, oh my God, if they Vivian, like if whatever is going on, if you star on turn 5, wow, can that really swing the tide?
Oh yeah, I love Star of Extinction. I love it because when the card first came out, it was just like, oh, what a cool flavor card, and then it just turned out to be like this actually fantastic constructed card, which it seemed a little counterintuitive because it's so expensive, and it's like it's weird, right? It's just like here's a weird Stone Rain, but it has this other text that is just ended up being so cool, and it's contributed in so many different decks, right? Like it's been great in Naya, it's great here, it's great in just straight blue-red.
And red-green. So Treasure Map is another one that, speaking of applying in so many decks, one of the big takeaways, I think, from Adrian's deck is how much people should be using Treasure Map more. Again, you've been singing this from, a fair bit of time, for a fair bit of time now, but Treasure Map in a mid-rangey sort of strategy is just such a low to the ground, not overly ambitious way to smooth your draw and get a little bit of card advantage. Yeah. It's a little bit of card advantage, a little bit of mana advantage, a little bit of smoothing. It's very modest and well-rounded, and more decks should probably be taking advantage of it.
I feel it's like the Dennis Bentley. Do you remember when Dennis Bentley won U.S. Nationals back in like 95 or 96? And people were like, what a not very necro-y necro deck. And his whole thing was just like, look, if I draw an extra 10 cards, shouldn't I win? Like, do I have to be like the most necro-y deck, Right. What's wrong with drawing 10 cards, And that's what I think about Treasure Map, right? It just gives you, because in like these, it's like it's not going so hard in any way. It's just like contributing to pretty good strategies, but a lot of different pretty good strategies. It just gives you a little more oomph. Like sometimes you get mana advantage. Sometimes you draw 3 extra cards. Sometimes it's enabling.
It's sort of 4, actually, because the land is the one. You end up with, it ends up being a 4-for-1 if you drag it out.
Yeah, the land is relevant, right? But like sometimes you're like these, like a Boros deck or a mono red beatdown deck. It just gives them the resources required to make their experimental frenzy good, or the mana for their fight with fire to go big, and. Here, it's just awesome. It's just like the less ambitious version of Azur's Gateway, but the less ambitious version of Azur's Gateway on time is so meaningful in a deck that's so heavily biased towards Niv-Mizzet Parun.
Mm-hmm. So actually, speaking of Niv-Mizzet Parun decks, all-time great Owen Turtenwald top-aided with 2 copies of Niv-Mizzet in the sideboard of his Is It Drake's deck. But the more interesting technology, I guess, first of all, main deck Entrancing Melody.
Ooh.
That's cool.
Yeah, I played against that recently, and he can go up to, it looks like 3. I think Entrancing Melody is fantastic in blue-red Drakes, right? Like,
yep. Particularly with 4 Goblin Electromancer. That's an important part of the equation. Turn 2 Electromancer, turn 3 Entrancing Melody, whatever they played.
So if you think about this card, right, like a traditional control magic costs 4, right? And then like a modern day control magic that actually plausibly let you play typically costs 5. This card will cost 3 a lot of the time because people just have like a dorky 2/1 that they played on turn 1. And is that a great investment of your Entrancing Melody? I think it's fine when it's part of this package that is buying back Arclight Phoenix or you're like there's so many things. Like the Electromancer is a good way. Then it costs 2 in that case.
Well, the key, by the way, it's not even stealing the ones. Where the real money comes, you got the right matchup, but the real money is against the white deck, specifically taking Adanto Vanguard.
Ooh.
Adanto Vanguard is a real problem for this deck that's relying on Shock, Beacon Bolt, Lava Coil.
Yeah, even Lava Coil doesn't kill it very well at all.
Right, and instead, Owen's got a couple extra answers. He's got this Entrancing Melody with more in the board. He's got Blink of an Eye. The idea of being able to actually interact with the Adanto Vanguard is, I think it's an important distinction. And then, of course, obviously, he's got Murmuring Mystic, which is another part of that same plan.
Yeah,
but I just think Entrancing Melody as a preemptive measure, as a response to Adanto Vanguard, is so smart.
I think I would go harder on Murmuring Mystic. Just because I love the synergy between Murmuring Mystic and Entrancing Melody so much. Like, isn't it cool that your control magic is also making 1/1 flyers?
Okay, dude.
It's like so. I mean, it's just so much synergy.
Sure, I don't know. Maybe. It's just that the Cyborg cards are worth so much in this deck, and I'm not sure that you got to be careful. Each one that could be the case, but it's tough because each one is so precious of a slot, and I like the use of such a wide variety of cards, making it harder for other people to metagame against your specific plan. Something else I wanted to call out, though, Adrian made use of Enigma Drake in his Jeskai deck, whereas Owen actually cut all of the Enigma Drakes from his Izzet deck. And instead is just, obviously not everybody was using the Electromancer, but Owen uses the Electromancer the best. He's got 4 Radical Idea, 4 Chart a Course, 2 Discovery, 2 Tormenting Voice. There's so much of that 2-cost powerful cantrip stuff going on. He's got so many ways to bin Arclight Phoenix and so many ways to get it back repeatedly. He's definitely making a lot more use of the Arclight Phoenix aspect, and I love that he's more focused on stuff like, let me get the extra card from Chart a Course. I'm not too worried about finishing the game once I draw enough extra cards.
What do you think about only playing 2 Discovery, but then making room for 2 Tormenting Voice and 1 Mirari Conjecture? The Mirari Conjecture. Like, these are pretty unusual choices, right? Well,
the Mirari Conjecture has been gaining steam basically since the Pro Tour. It didn't used to be widely adopted, but at the Pro Tour it started to break out a little bit, this whole use of the Mirari Conjecture and Izzet. And I like it here too. I think that it gives you it's a nice amount of a little bit extra staying power. It's a little extra dimension. There's lots of little things that it does for you, like giving you in the short run, basically it's 1 finisher going off the top that is not quite as ambitious as Niv-Mizzet. So I actually like it here, and it is not universal by any means, but we did start seeing a little bit more of it at the Pro Tour.
What do you think?
But it's particularly good when you have all these cantrips. Owen's much heavier use of cantrips ensures that if you ever get to Chapter 3 of the Mirari Conjecture, you're comboing off.
1 Blink of an Eye, that's another Adanto Vanguard solution? Or
it is. Yep. That's, definitely. And then it's just a versatile, well-rounded card. It's not that good. It's pretty mediocre. It's fine. But, it's just a little extra help in a variety of ways, and you get a little bit extra mileage out of that Goblin Electromancer.
How do you like this, the Izzet deck's matchups?
So Izzet is traditionally the kind of blue-red deck. It's the kind of blue deck that matches up more naturally against Golgari. This is actually kind of just one of those, all the matchups are kind of close, though. It's not about the blowout matchups, Typically, the reason you play Izzet is because you want to face anybody except Jeskai. But you're not taking the most ambitious of you don't have the biggest wins. You're just a good, solid deck that has a lot. You have more positive matchups than negative matchups. And your biggest weakness is a well-tuned Jeskai deck.
So if you're, let's say, one of the best tacticians in the history of the Pro Tour, this might be a good option for you.
Yeah, and Owen definitely showed that this past weekend.
Can you talk about the Jeskai matchup a little bit? So I've seen this play out, so I think I have a decent idea about it. But intuitively, before I saw it play out myself, I thought the Izzet deck should have a huge advantage because it has like these recurring threats like Arclight Phoenix that the Jeskai deck can't, let's call it, counter, right? Like, they're all free, and like all these threats are coming out are 2-for-1s. Like the Drake is actually 2-for-1, and the Arclight Phoenix is at least a 2-for-1, right? Every single time, versus the Jeskai deck has to use real resources to deal with these cards.
So to begin with, this is a deck that has 4 shocks, 3 lava coils, and a beacon bolt all in the main deck. And as if 8 just nearly stone dead blanks, at least beacon bolt will typically be able to kill a crackling Drake or something, right? But shock and lava coil, I guess, could too. But in general, the removal is just not where you want to be against Jeskai. But even though this deck has a lot of looting, it also has just so much card draw, you can't get away from all of it. Because, you want to discard your Arclight Phoenix, you want to discard your extra removal, you want to discard your extra land, but at the end of the day, this deck has so much air. 2 Tormenting Voice, not great against permission, but just more air. Tormenting Voice, Chart of Course, Radical Idea, Opt. You're just digging through your deck. How many cards in this deck even do anything? Right? Like the Jeskai deck's going to draw more cards than you because they have Expansion Explosion, right? Like they have ways, Chemist's Insight or Niv-Mizzet or whatever. They've got the long game, and then when it comes to the mid game, this deck spends so much time casting cantrips instead of developing the board. Meanwhile, the Jeskai deck's just developing its mana base and building up to a big card draw spell. Additionally, the surge of Adanto Vanguards has made it so that there's more need from the Jeskai decks to be playing stuff like Seal Away, which answer Arclight Phoenix. And obviously, Arclight Phoenix can still be great. There's still lots of ways where Arclight Phoenix will win against Jeskai. It's not like it's some blowout or anything. And this deck's going to draw Arclight Phoenixes more often than most. But it's not Goblin Electromancer makes the random removal cards in the Jeskai deck. Every card in the Jeskai deck ends up matching up well against cards in the Izzet deck. And the Izzet deck has lots of bad cards and lots of air.
It's just too dirtily, and the Jeskai
too dirtily.
Just drawing money.
Right. Well, the Jeskai deck, it's slower on the uptake, but the Izzet deck is spending that extra time so frequently just drawing more cards that replace themselves without getting anywhere. It's like digging very quickly, but if the game stretches till turn 5, 6, 7, whatever, Jeskai really gets into its groove. And if you notice, for instance, Adrian's list featured 2 lava coils. Lava coil was everywhere, also good against the Arclight Phoenix. Doesn't mean you shouldn't Arclight Phoenix. I'm just saying that it's not like somebody that has Settle the Wreckage, Lava Coil, and even, it sounds funny, but even Niv-Mizzet. Because sometimes the way you contain the Arclight Phoenix is by shooting it down with Niv-Mizzet repeatedly.
Oh, you can just also block, right?
Oh yeah,
he is bigger than the Arclight Phoenix, so they have to maybe that has something to do with the shock, but still they have to have something.
Oh, and I kind of think that some of the games that you're more worried about are when they have multiple Arclight Phoenixes, and even though you block one and eat it, the other one hits you, and then they just get it back. But if you actually have Niv-Mizzet, first of all, obviously you're drawing a million cards from all the cantrips they're playing. But second of all, if you can actually shoot down the other Arclight Phoenix so they can't even punch through any damage, that's a big deal.
Can you imagine diving down when they go to shock? So
oh yeah, oh yes, I can. Phoenix. I can and have.
That is disgusting. Let me borrow your shock. By the way, dive down. Boom, boom, everybody's dead. My guy lives. Oh man, the more I think about it, the more insane Adrian's deck seems in the metagame.
Owens also got 2 Shivan Fire in the sideboard, which I really like. The use of 4 Shock main and 2 Shivan Fire is worth putting a little bit of attention on. First of all, I love the use of Shock in the main deck instead of Shivan Fire, because I think that extra damage really does matter here. Like, you really do need to get through a little bit of extra damage, and I think Lava Coil is just too much better than Lightning Strike right now to sacrifice that. But the ability to get a little bit of extra damage that can hit things like a Vivian Reed that came down and killed your Arclight Phoenix or Crackling Drake, I think that's an important dimension. And I think that the use of 6 after sideboarding goes a long way for helping just give you the tempo that you want against these white aggro decks and these red aggro decks.
Oh, sure. Also, like, just a cheap card that can deal with most of their threats for 1 mana has completely different meaning in a deck with Arclight Phoenix, right? Like, you're getting so much tempo there, and also Shivan Fire for 4. That's a thing. That's a solid. You might eat an elephant that way.
Oh yeah, and the hitting a venerated Luxodon, definitely. But there's also the ability to hit any of the, like, for instance, that some of the Angels and the Banalish Captain, if the game stretches out, like, that matters. That extra, having the option for hitting something that's a little bit bigger can help round things out a little bit. So anyway, I thought that was. I think this is just a great take. Upgrade to the blue red style. I would be a little bit wary. I think it's always. Izzet Drakes, I think, is always going to be. It's just a consistent, reliable. It's a solid choice. The floor is pretty high. I would. I don't think. I think it might be slightly on the downswing because of just how much the Jeskai decks ended up being able to evolve and adapt to this new metagame. But I think it's worth calling a little bit of attention to the Golgari decks as well, because they were not without some upgrades.
Oh my gosh, there are 4 of them in this top 8? Am I
right?
Counting that right?
The single biggest thing by far was the widespread adoption of Golden Demise, I think. And Golgari is a great deck anyway. It's an absolutely stellar deck to begin with. But now that the format is having to adapt to the white aggro decks, the cards that are good against the white aggro decks are not usually the same cards that were so good against Golgari. And second of all, Golgari's got access to one of the best anti-white cards in the format, Golden Demise. Golden Demise is in many regards like a Deafening Clarion, but in a strategy that doesn't have access to Deafening Clarion. But going further, Golden Demise actually kills a Danto Vanguard and whatever Dauntless Bodyguard was protecting.
Oh, that's like good.
That's a big deal.
And sometimes it just doesn't affect your squad.
Totally. Like, Golgari can get up to the City's Blessing, but at the end of the day, the real thing is just that it also doesn't always kill your guys that Deafening Clarion would have. For instance, Jadelight Ranger frequently has 3 toughness. Wild Growth Walker, 3 toughness, right? Like, the way that the games actually play out, Golden Demise is such a great way to bridge in just the ways you need. Because even though it doesn't kill a Banalish Marshal straight up, you've got access to Find, Finality, Vraska's Contempt, Cast Down. Like, you've got Ravenous Chupacabra. You've got lots of really good ways to solve the things that can live through a Golden Demise. You just need to survive that early rush when they go 1-drop, 1-drop, 1-drop. And Golden Demise does that in spades. Or if they go 1-drop, 2-drop that's a Danto Vanguard, which would normally just really mess up any kind of sweeper plans. Yeah. So Brian Lynn's second place deck was relatively straightforward from the Doom Whisperer style. But the one that caught my eye, that was my favorite of the Golgari decks, was Seth Manfield's 6th place deck. Seth Manfield took the Golden Demise technology to another level. He's got 2 Druid of the Cowl instead of Seeker's Squire.
Druid of the Cowl is a card that's really grown on me. It's like an Omen Speaker defensively, but that has an awesome ability for, a green deck.
Oh, yeah. And if you notice, Seth's big game is a fair bit different than most. He's got 5 Planeswalkers and 3 Carnage Tyrants. The use of 2 Karns, 3 Vivian Reeds, and 3 Carnage Tyrants means that he's a lot less susceptible to sweepers, other than, of course, as always, Star of Extinction. But when you've got Druid of the Cowl making Carnage Tyrant or Vivian Reed or Karn come down a turn ahead of schedule, that's really exciting. But also Druid of the Cowl being able to actually stay in against a white deck where Seeker's Squire has to go out. Because remember, the white deck's got access to 4 Tocatli Honor Guard. And one of the Tocatli Honor Guard, sadly, doesn't die to Golden Demise. And it's so hard to just fight the Tocatli Honor Guard battle all the time, because even when you win, you don't really win. It's not like you get value. But with Druid of the Cowl instead of Seeker Squire, there are less must-take-out cards from the main deck and more sticking to your core game plan. You can use Druid of the Cowl to completely just to moat these 2/1s sometimes. What a great turn 2. When you play Druid of the Cowl and your opponent played a 2/1 on turn 1, and then you have you use the Druid of the Cowl to kind of hold the ground a little bit while you set up a Golden Demise. That's so great.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I thought this was a really compelling take on Golgari, and definitely where I would start personally.
To me, I thought that one of the big stories was first of all the number of Golgari decks that did well, right? So this was a complete reversal, call it, from the Pro Tour top 8, just how the Golgari decks just did in the Swiss or whatever, the Pro Tour, but that there are just a lot of wild growth walkers going on here, right? Like, it looks like gone are the days where people had like 2 wild growth walkers. There are 3 to 4 wild growth walkers in each one of these main decks, despite the fact that there are some distinctly different styles of Golgari, Doom Whisperer versus Planeswalkers, etc.
Right. I mean, literally the first time you wild growth walker, you're kind of doing it. But also, I think that right now in the format, people just are seeing the value of a 1/3 for 2. This is just a really good format for a 1/3 for 2. And that extra life matters a lot for helping put the nail in the coffin against those red decks.
If people are playing like Legion's Landing and, Bodyguards and so forth, like those guys are just all terrible against a 1/3 for 2.
So, yep, definitely a great rebound for Golgari. Preying on how much people had to tune their decks against white aggro. And really capitalizing on the strength of Golgari gaining Golden Demise.
I just want to gripe one thing about Seth's list. What do you think about the 1 Reclamation Sage in the sideboard? Isn't that like an odd choice for that functionality given the popularity of Tocatli Honor Guard?
Well, it depends. If you think that Reclamation Sage, if you want an answer against the white decks, it's possible that the Reclamation Sage might only be mediocre. But if you see it instead as an answer to Azur's Gateways, Treasure Maps, or I think the single biggest thing is that Reclamation Sage here is actually an important card against red aggro. I think that the red aggro's primary game plan against these Golgari decks after sideboarding is experimental frenzying you into next Tuesday, when they've got 4 experimental frenzies and 4 treasure maps. When you Reclamation Sage as a follow-up to the red deck playing 4 treasure maps or 4 experimental frenzies, that's huge. And then you might be saying, well, couldn't you play with some other answer? Well, I think that having an extra blocker is actually still important.
So, first of all, you're correct, right? Like, the Golgari deck is just so much better than the red deck on the merits.
But you also get it back with fine finality. That's the other part I wanted to mention.
I'm just kind of thinking, like, if that's true, I'm less excited about playing a potential blocker that just bites it to Chain Whirler, and I'd be more apt to want to play a card like Brontodon, which is an outstanding blocker and is not bricked walled by Tocatli Honor Guard. And I know it's kind of a small
I don't
thing.
know. You don't want to Brontodon the treasure map, though. And part of the problem is that they all have tons of lava coils, and they're boarding in Fight with Fire. So, I think that the Brontodon, you're paying too much for the 3/4 aspect, and it's actually not that good against the red decks. Whereas with the Reclamation Sage, you can just happily play it on turn 3 into their treasure map, be on time and have no problems, and you still have a little something, so you have some value to show for it. And what's more, Find Finality kind of stretches that value over time. Obviously you could get back to Brontodon also, but if you're getting a 2-for-1 with Reclamation Sage, and then your Find Finale getting it back and getting another 2-for-1, that's just more cascading card advantage. Whereas if you play a Brontodon, it's going to eat a lava coil some percentage of the time. If they lava coil your Reclamation Sage, you are so happy. But if they lava coil your Brontodon and it's exiled, then you can't even Find Finale it back.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think it's not intuitive, but I actually think the Reclamation Sage is decent here. I agree with you. In general, Brontodon's a stronger card, but I do like the Reclamation Sage here for what it's trying to accomplish. I think that if you were really just more focused on the white deck, maybe the Brontodon would be better. It's certainly a more reliable answer against the white deck. But I think that it's the red deck where you really want the Reclamation Sage over the Brontodon in particular, which is funny given historically how much the Brontodon's been good against the red deck. But
So, yeah, but I mean, you're right anyway. If the red deck doesn't have Experimental Frenzy going, it's unlikely to be the Golgari deck. The Golgari deck is so...
Or Treasure Map, right.
Yeah, good on the merits. All of its cards are just really good against all the red decks cards. Guys are pretty big enough to beat them in the fights. It has good removal for cards like Steamkin, and it has massive card advantage and life gain engines that are just all really problematic for the red deck. So if the red deck has to go way over the top with Phoenix or Experimental Frenzy or Treasure Map or all of them, just to stay in the game. And at some point they just blow the game open, right? If those cards haven't been answered. But just the regular cards versus regular cards, Golgari is going to stomp the red deck typically.
It's going to be in pretty good shape as long as it doesn't get run over. And stuff like all these Wild Walkers and Druid Cowls, they do a fantastic job of that part.
So, speaking of 3/4s though, man, Golgari Findbroker, what happened to that guy? There was one total copy in main decks the whole top 8?
It doesn't line up right. It's a slow 2-for-1 in a deck that already has the matchups. There are some people who are bigger than Golgari. A Findbroker is a little too slow for those matchups. And there are some people who are faster than Golgari, and the Findbroker is too slow for those matchups. So I think that's really the problem, is that it's just awkwardly in the middle in a polarized format,
That's surprising, but I think you're right.
What did you think of Jacob Tilk's mono white aggro deck? It's not exactly reinventing the wheel or anything, but just kind of among the white options, what do you think of his choice to go this route?
So I like this better than some of the Pro Tour decks, just because I think Hunted Witness is way, way better at the 1 than some of the cards that we've seen. Like an 0-3 Dinosaur, less exciting to me. I think if I were to play mono white aggro, I would definitely go kind of like the LSV life gain route. But I do like this main deck Lyra Dawnbringer. That's some spice.
It's all right. There were a couple people who did this, but they usually would dare not dream to go so big main deck. And I don't know, though. I still just think these decks should be playing with 4 Conclave Tribunals main deck. It's not the biggest deal, but I've just had such good experiences with Conclave Tribunal here.
I agree.
What do you think of Pride of Conquerors?
I like Pride of Conquerors in the abstract, and it's obviously a great blowout card. But I think it's just also One of the problems with the white deck is it can't regulate its draw at all. And we saw in the finals what happened when LSV had to mulligan repeatedly. If you're playing this deck and you have to mulligan and you have like pretty weak cards to begin with, like, so this deck thrives on being able to deploy many of its weak cards and close the game out quickly. Like, but if you've like mulliganed or you're just like, you're drawing weird, like that card you just never want to rip. It is very bad if you're in any kind of a resource fight.
True. Could you handle not having Experimental Frenzy after sideboarding?
I mean, mono planes is attractive. I don't think that I could possibly go with a white aggro deck with no access to Experimental Frenzy. In fact, I would say that I would go harder on Experimental Frenzy than most of the top 8 decks from the Pro Tour. Like, LSV played 4 copies in his sideboard, but like, I mean, I've seen very good players playing white aggro decks that went way harder. Like, they had their own maps, right? Or they had like Fight with Fires in their side. I mean, a lot of these guys play Banefire, right? But yep. Like way, like, you know, even if they're mono white in game 1, like the red cards are where they're getting a ton of value after sideboarding. Because the problem is with no red cards, like, what's this deck's plan against Jeskai? Obviously, Jeskai was the winning deck of the tournament. Jeskai already has 3.
Good.
It's 3+ Clarions. It has. I mean, obviously, Zonto Vanguard is like very good against most of the control decks, but Clarions are going to mop up the rest of the guys pretty well. You know.
Well, Dauntless Bodyguard helps shut that down too, and Pride of the Conquerors can be used tactically sometimes. I actually think this deck is favored against the Jeskai, not by a lot, but favored against the Jeskai decks that people are playing at the Pro Tour. I just think that once you know that this is the enemy, people evolve their Jeskai decks, which is part of the reason why we've just seen so many Jeskai decks doing well this week, is that once they just have access to a few more shocks and stuff like that, it can really move the needle. Because obviously Deafening Clarion was already just like a warping card for the matchup. And so even though this deck has access to a few ways to potentially put up a fight, it's if this deck doesn't get the free wins from, 1-drop Adanto Vanguard or 1-drop, then I think that it can really slide towards Jeskai.
I just think that with even the mild comeback from Settle the Wreckage, Adrian, the winning deck of the tournament, playing 1+1, not having access to a mountain and or just Banefire in general in your sideboard, where Jeskai is just known to be stock one of the best decks in the format, I feel like that's a mistake. Like, that card is so powerful, it's pretty flexible, and it has super easy access for a deck like this. So I just don't know if I could go to war without Banefire in this strategy.
This top 8 we've already touched on Jeskai, Izzet Drakes, Golgari, and White Aggro. There was a really cool new addition to the fray in the top 32, Justin Andros's Grixis deck. Did you see this one, the top 32 of GP Milwaukee? With he has access to 3 Nico Bolas, he actually kept 2 of them in the sideboard, keeping the main deck a little bit more blanking opponents, making some of its opponents' interactive cards less good. This is a really interesting mix of card advantage engines. So he's got, to begin with, 3 Search for Azcanta and 2 2+2, the Eldest Reborn. So 5 enchantments generating serious card advantage to go along with his 5 Planeswalkers generating serious card advantage, to go along with a ton of 2-for-1s, 2 Crackling Drakes, a Nico Bolas, 3 Ravenous Chupacabras, 4 Charter-Course. This is we're looking at literally 10 2-for-1s, 10 card draw engines, and then also the potential card advantage of stuff like Fight with Fire or Golden Demise or whatever. This is just a crazy amount of 2-for-1s and card draw engines.
So the thing about this deck is, when you're just playing the abstract, you have a lot of 2-for-1s. There's 2 things that I think potentially can limit the success of this deck. One of them is This deck is deceptively weak to Tocatli Honor Guard, right? Like, so you have stuff that can answer it, but all your guys like are, Tocatli Honor Guard is hassling them a little bit. That's at the low end of the curve, but at the top end of the curve, like you need those 2 copies of the Eldest Reborn to come on time. You need them to come when you've set the board up.
What about Rao? Rao is it Viceroy?
Well, I'm just talking about your ability to deal with Carnage Tyrant at the top, right? So Tocatli Honor Guard at the bottom.
Okay, yeah. Carnage Tyrant is admittedly a potential danger.
Yeah, like this.
But he's got 2 Star of Extinction and 2 more of the Eldest Reborn in the board.
Certainly you have the capability to deal with it. You just need to set the board up correctly, right? Like, so if they have like anything else, but Eldest Reborn's not going to save you from Carnage Tyrant.
Yeah, I don't think the reason you play this deck is because you just want to face Carnage Tyrants all day. I wouldn't worry about Tocatli Honor Guard too much, though. 3 Lava Coil, 2 Fight with Fire, 2 Vraska's Contempt, a Cast Down, 3 Rao Is It Viceroy. And that's to say nothing of Thought Erasures and the Eldest Reborn. This is a deck with a ton of answers to Tocatli.
I'm a little surprised that this isn't a disinformation campaign deck. Like,
why?
Because, like, whenever there's almost Erasure, I've just...
Dude, that's the only one!
Yeah, he has Notion Rain in the sideboard.
Yeah, but so what, man? Like, Nico Bolas, Raven... How much more card advantage do you want the man to play?
I want to go hard.
Dude, Search for Azcanta that's the one that's a little wild to me. That's a little surprising, but it's interesting here in a deck full of Terminates instead of Terminates and cantrip, like 2-for-1s instead of any counterspells. Like, this is a deck with 0 counterspells. His only hand interaction is 4 Thought Erasure.
Yeah,
that's a little wild.
A board control deck, largely, right?
Definitely, and
Planeswalkers up top.
A deck with a crazy amount of card advantage. I don't think I would want to play against this deck with a Jeskai deck, for instance.
Yeah?
No, I don't think so. I think that you could just lose to the Search for Azcanta. You could just lose to the Eldest Reborn.
Can you get RRRUUU into this deck? Is that a feasible thing?
I don't think so. I don't know. It's super hard to imagine. I mean, maybe there's something you can do with Treasure Map or something. But, like, for instance, we see here there's 4 swamps.
Yeah.
4 swamp is... Right, because remember, you've got access to 4 Dragon Skull Summit, 4 Drowned Catacomb, 4 Water Grave. That's only 12. And this is a deck that wants to be using, it wants to play Ravenous Chupacabra on time. And it needs Golden Demise on turn 3. So you can't skimp on the black mana. So I don't know. Maybe you could, but it would be a lot tougher because, like, without having access to, with no Blood Crypts or anything, for instance, maybe there's a way to do a Treasure Map. I don't know.
Legion Warboss in the sideboard also, which is just also quietly a card advantage engine of its own. Yep.
Legion Warboss is it's a great Baneslayer of sorts for when people are trying to deal with all your 2-for-1s. Okay, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so, outside of the Grand Prix, anything else going on this weekend that was an interesting deck you might want to talk about?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The winner of the Classic in Vegas, and you and I had touched on this briefly just in conversation before, but, man, I thought Nick Prince's take on Celestia Tokens was a really cool way to revitalize an archetype that was one of the best performing archetypes last weekend, but even though it didn't top 8 because of the draft records of people, the problem is that the amount of collateral damage that this deck is incurring as a result of everybody just going after every kind of white aggro deck. Let's put it this way: if you want to beat a tokens deck, you can, right? Like that's just typically the way of the world. But Nick's use of 3 copies of Song of Freyalise is kind of an interesting dimension, particularly in a metagame that's more like the classic metagame was compared to the Grand Prix. Like the classic metagame had a lot of like Golgari and Izzet and a little bit less Jeskai, but in general though the Celestia Tokens using Song of Freyalise to power out just really big turn, like setting up for a game-winning turn 6 or 5 against some of these decks that don't have a ton of removal. But you can on turn 3, you can actually go, like, say on, like, if you lead with Legion's Landing into like, say, I don't know, Saproling Migration, a Song of Freyalise next turn is already a desperate ritual, right? So you're a mana ahead of time for just deploying more stuff onto the board. And that's not even counting if you have some sweet stuff like Amara, Soul of the Accord going on. But
what's your payoff? March of the Multitudes?
Well, it's not just one payoff. You just deploy all the cards in your hand. Whether you play Song of Freyalise on turn 3 or turn 4, you're playing out a couple more cards that turn, and then you're emptying your hand almost the following turn. And on the following turn, you're winning the game. You're doing something big, like, for instance, 2 Flower Flourishes in a turn, or you're playing Flower Flourish and your History of Benalia is being triggered. And it's not just that you have like 9 mana or whatever on that turn, like the turn before. It's that you got to empty your hand, and then you get an extra +1/+1 and lots of great skills on the final turn. You know, that, like, trample is actually important if you've got Flower Flourish going against somebody who just wants to survive your big turn.
Oh, yeah. That's big. And then the other thing is the +1/+1 buff is persistent, right? So it's, even though the other skills go away at the end of turn, your guys stay a little bit bigger.
Right, because if you think about it, would you play with 2 mana? All your creatures have get a +1/+1 counter? Oh, that's interesting.
Maybe. I mean,
right.
That's pretty similar to Crusade, right? So probably I would.
And then you get that temporary boost of Trample and Indestructible and Vigilance and all that. But instead of having Crusade for the first 2 turns, you have Earthcraft. Like, Earthcraft's not that bad of a card to have for 2 turns and then cash in for a Crusade.
Well, especially when you're playing with cards like Amara, Soul of the Accord, right?
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you feel like maybe you should have 4. Like, this card seems pretty good.
Well, the problem is that the second Song of Freyalise you draw is really bad. Like, it's just such big diminishing returns, you know?
Fair enough.
So I thought that was a big, a pretty cool way to breathe some life back into this deck. I still think I would play 4 Legion's Landing, but on the whole, I kind of like this. I also think that 4 Thorn Lieutenants is kind of interesting in this new format.
I think that the Thorn Lieutenant is very good, but I don't think it's better than Amara. Like, I'm okay.
Well, he already has an Amara. You can debate over the 4 versus 3, but it's a Danto Vanguard that he cut.
The clever thing is with the diminishing returns on Amara, because it's so synergistic and so powerful. Yeah, I don't know about Noah Danto Vanguard even in sideboard. You know, some folks just have it in the sideboard for Jeskai, but I don't know about that.
I thought that Thorn Lieutenant as a possible option when the world is, like, adjusting to a Danto Vanguard, Thorn Lieutenant is actually not the worst way to do it, you know? And it depends on what you're thinking you're going to face. But, like, it is synergistic with the whole token theme, and it's a great way to sink your mana later. And it's got a little bit of the Baneslayer experience on its own, but it's also, because if you notice, Nick's deck, despite how heavy of a token theme it has, he's got a ton of must-kill threats. Lyra Dawnbringer, 2 Shalai, Voice of Plenty, 3 Trostani, Discordant, 3 Amara, Soul of Accord, 4 Thorn Lieutenant. Every one of his natural creatures is actually a must-kill threat.
Oh, that's solid. Just a subtle point, and I know this has probably been true for most of the Selesnya decks for most of this format, but, you know, these are wild white aggro decks from one side. They're also green creature decks from the other side, but just completely immune to Tocatli Honor Guard. They don't have any of the liabilities of the Merfolk Branchwalker, Jadelight Ranger kind of decks, and I think that's kind of important, right? Like,
very, definitely.
You know, because they have so much upside and none of the downside that most of the other green decks have.
Right, and it's not like the one tension part is Night of Autumn. If you see, like, if you want to board in Tocatli Honor Guard, you would not want to also board in Knight of Autumn at the same time.
Yep.
And here, Nick has chosen to go with the Knight of Autumn approach. And you don't have to worry. Like you want to board Knight of Autumn in against the white decks. You don't have to worry about them having Tocatli for the reasons you were just describing, where you just none of your cards in your main deck. Like it's just not worth it to them to try to Tocatli. Yeah. But this deck trying to use Tocatli against Golgari is definitely a reasonable option. But it's kind of cool that in Nick's deck, the Golgari decks anticipating the Tocatli are not. They're just going to be it's a wasted effort. Like there's nothing here. Like this is still a deck that after sideboarding against Golgari is not, their removal is not that efficient.
Yeah, but at the same time, he can go over the top of Golgari decks with the Immortal Sun, which shuts down their Vivian Reed, shuts down their Karn, shuts down their Vraska, and it has a lot of that flavor of the Tocatli Honor Guard, but just for a different type of card.
Definitely. And the Knight of Autumn, though, by the way, is actually at its key, at its best against the red decks, where it's functioning like it's a Reclamation Sage at worst, right? Like for the Treasure Mage or Treasure Map or Experimental Frenzy. But it's got the upside of, instead of the Reclamation Sage aspect, you can cash it in for a 4/3, or you can gain 4 extra life. All 3 of those modes are so good against red. All of those modes. Depending on the texture of the game, all 3 are very attractive.
I'm not interested in any of those things, and anyone who does that to a poor red mage should be sent home.
And then finally, Nullhide Ferox is very common in these green-white decks, as we see here in Nick Prince's deck. Do not play Nico Bolas against the Celestine decks. They want Nico Bolas. They want Nullhide Ferox anyway against you. They would be playing the Ferox even if you have none, and they're going to get your Eldest Reborn with it. So, you can't don't make it worse for yourself. Do not make it harder on yourself.
Well, I think that is a wonderful place to end the week where Adrian Sullivan built the deck of the week, because I will just remind you that there was a time that Adrian had us playing forecasting cost 6/6 green creatures that did not have text box like this. We had a far worse text box, and we came to the Pro Tour with that card.
We, like you and him, definitely not. I have not hunted Wumpuses.
I made day 2. I will have you know.
Nice. All right, awesome, man. And what an awesome format.
Absolutely. This standard is straight fire. I am very happy to play it every week.
Nice work, Wizards. All right, see you next week, man.
All right, night, guys.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play Dredge, it's a jailer hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis days. Lost a lot of friends,